This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopia rejects Arab League resolution to take negotiations to the UN Security Council. South Africa tightens restrictions as the country enters third wave. And leaders of Russia and the U.S. meet amid tense bilateral ties. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight, I'm alongside my colleague, Uche, who has our business news. Uche?
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live. Ghana's economic growth slows in the first quarter as the country regains momentum from the pandemic. And France and Egypt sign around $4.6 billion worth of bilateral agreements. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. And once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. Let's begin in Ethiopia, where the country's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has held his final campaign rally in the southern town of Jimma ahead of key elections in the country next week. Opposition parties in some regions are boycotting the exercise, which will be the sixth since the end of the military rule in Ethiopia 30 years ago. The United States has criticized the decision to push ahead with the twice delayed vote. The polls were originally scheduled for August 2020, but were postponed with officials citing the COVID-19 pandemic. The Monday polls, although billed as nationwide, will not be held in 1/5 of the country's constituencies, including that of the Tigray region that has been racked by conflict.
The forces who will compete in this election, those who love and want to serve Ethiopia, who magnify the unity and liberty of Ethiopia, all of them, I wish them the best of luck in this election. Our issue isn't protecting Ethiopia's unity. Rather, it is making Ethiopia the strength of the Horn of Africa.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia has rejected an Arab League resolution calling on the United Nations Security Council to intervene in a regional dispute over Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam. Foreign ministers from Arab countries met in Qatar on Tuesday in the latest effort by Cairo and Khartoum to reach an agreement on the filling of the dam. Ethiopia is pinning its hopes of economic development and power generation on the dam, which sits on the Nile River. Egypt relies on the river for as much as 90% of its fresh water and sees the dam as an existential threat. And Sudan is concerned about the operation of its own Nile dams and water stations. Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Gate says water security is an integral part of Arab interests.
What is the role of the Security Council? The decision does not only refer the issue to the Security Council. The Egyptian and Sudanese message was clear that the Security Council must fulfill its responsibility. But the decision also calls for urgently holding a session to discuss the dispute.
Of course, there are steps in the decision that are being taken gradually. We always call for a diplomatic resolution based on international law, and we hope that the other party can come around on the basis of international law in order to reach a solution that can satisfy everyone.
In a statement, the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry said the Arab League had squandered its opportunity to play a constructive role as the Nile is not exclusive property. All right, let's turn our attention now to South Africa, where alcohol sales have been restricted, curfew tightened, and the number of people allowed to attend gatherings reduced as South Africa moves back to lockdown level 3. In a televised national address, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that South Africa's lockdown regulations will be tightened as the country grapples with a third COVID-19 wave. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
With South Africa firmly in the grips of the third COVID-19 wave, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced stricter lockdown measures.
we have to contain this new wave of infections. Since I last spoke to you just over 2 weeks ago, the average number of daily new infections has doubled. Then, 2 weeks ago, we were recording around 3,700 daily infections. Over the last 7 days, we have recorded an average of 7,500 daily infections. Hospital admissions due to COVID-19 over the last 14 days are 59% higher.
South Africa's economic hub, the Gauteng province, has been particularly hard hit by this third wave.
Gauteng has been the worst hit. It accounts for nearly 2/3 of new cases measured over the last week. The increase in infections in Gauteng is now faster and steeper than it was at the same time in previous waves. Within a matter of days, it is likely that the number of new cases in Gauteng will surpass the peak of the second wave.
Restrictions that were announced by the president include a decrease in the number of people allowed to gather together. Now, only 50 people are allowed to gather indoors and 100 people outside. The previous level 2 restrictions allowed as many as 100 people to gather indoors and 250 outside. The sale of alcohol for off-site consumption has also been adjusted and is now permitted between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. from Monday to Thursday. Alcohol sales for on-site consumption will be permitted as per license conditions up to 9 p.m. Alcohol consumption in all public spaces is strictly prohibited. South Africa moving to level 3 lockdown means a longer evening curfew. The curfew has been extended by an hour. It will now start from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Non-essential establishments like restaurants, bars, and fitness centers will need to close by 9 p.m. to allow their employees and patrons to travel home before the start of the curfew.
And I fully understand that you are all concerned about constraints that restrict your freedom to move around or to travel, your freedom to gather, to socialize, to worship, and in some instances, your freedom to even earn a living. Yet, we also know that these restrictions have been effective in containing the spread of the virus.
Ramaphosa also stated that the government continuously strives to prevent the spread of the virus while safeguarding the economy. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo has ordered the closure of nightclubs and limited public gatherings to 20 people in a bid to curb the spread of the coronavirus. President Felix Tshisekedi announced the new measures in a televised address. The country has recorded a spike in COVID-19 cases as it grapples with a third wave of infections. CGTN's Chris Ocharinga has more from Kinshasa.
The presidential directive will see nightclubs in the DRC shut for 15 days. Large gatherings have also been banned. Churches and other places of worship have been ordered to reduce the number of worshippers, and the wearing of masks in public is now compulsory. The new measures will take immediate effect. President Felix Tshisekedi says the Delta variant that was first identified in India has been spreading fast in the capital, Kinshasa. The city's hospitals are overwhelmed by patients, and most of them are ill-equipped to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. The DRC has so far recorded more than 35,000 cases and 854 deaths since the pandemic began in March last year, according to official figures. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Uganda is registering a sharp rise in cases of COVID-19. Doctors say many of them are severe and critical in nature. This is driving hospitals and health centers across the country to a crisis point, and there is an acute shortage of bed space and medical oxygen. The latest figures from the health ministry show that the country has so far registered more than 64,000 cases and close to 500 deaths. CGTN's Michael Baleke reports.
The city morgue in Kampala is busy. Funeral vans are now parked here, waiting to carry the dead. Many patients here have succumbed to COVID-19 after a horrifying struggle. Health authorities say the situation across the country is extremely worrying.
We are having an exponential growth in terms of new infections. And this is characterized with severe patients and also critically ill patients, and this is affecting almost all the age groups.
Uganda is battling a second wave of the pandemic. The country has registered more than 10,000 new cases in less than a week, and more than 900 people are hospitalized at different health centers across the country. The National Referral Hospital and the main COVID treatment center says the facility cannot meet the current oxygen needs for the growing patient numbers.
You find a patient requiring 70 liters of oxygen per minute, and yet the normal patient in the normal ICU requires between 1 and 10. So one patient in COVID ICU consumes the oxygen that would be required by 10 very sick patients in a normal ICU.
Several hospitals are now looking to private firms to supplement their oxygen stock. Uganda is set to receive additional doses of the COVID-19 vaccines from the COVAX facility. Health authorities believe pushing more jabs into people's arms will reduce the number of those who are seriously ill. Uganda received its first consignment of 964,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine in March. To date, more than 800,000 people have been inoculated.
Most of the vaccine centers had started experiencing shortages of these vaccines, so that means some people were not able to get their second jabs when they were supposed to.
The government has imposed another lockdown to control the spread of the virus. Schools, places of worship and open markets have been ordered to close, and travel between regions is now restricted. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Tunisia is proposing to partner with the World Health Organization to start local production of vaccines. Prime Minister Hichem Mechichi said his country has received only 1.6 million COVID-19 vaccines out of the 2.5 million hoped for by March via the WHO-led COVAX initiative. CGTN's Adnan Shawalshi has that report.
Hichem Mechichi appealed to the health body at a meeting in Geneva to speed up vaccine provision in order to accelerate the vaccination rollout in the North African country.
Inequalities in vaccine distribution between industrialized and developing countries is alarming. The result is that some countries are resuming normal life thanks to the vaccine rollout, while other countries like Tunisia, which is facing big economic difficulties, is still taking restrictive measures which deepen the socio-economic crisis and further paralyze the economy.
The Director General of the World Health Organization said WHO is willing to dispatch a team of experts to Tunisia in order to evaluate the country's readiness for COVID-19 vaccine production.
Tunisia is proposing that to partner with WHO to start local production, and we have agreed for our teams to work together, and whenever Prime Minister is ready, we can send a team to Tunisia that specialize experts on local production to help Tunisia.
Following a meeting with the Tunisian Prime Minister, the Director General of the World Trade Organization declared that it supports Tunisia's quest for local vaccine production.
We have discussed how to help with the production of vaccines in Tunisia, because Tunisia has the ecosystem and the competencies to produce it. It's quite complicated. We've had the head of the Pasteur Institute in Tunis who's explained the whole ecosystem. The WTO is following up with the WHO on the whole vaccine production chain and looking for ways to facilitate this operation in Tunisia.
Tunisia has rolled out more than 1.4 million vaccines, while the number of people who have registered on the national vaccination platform evax.tn has reached 2.4 million since the start of the vaccination campaign 4 months ago. The scientific committee at the Tunisian Health Department has warned that the lack of access to vaccines in developing countries and low-income nations would not just exacerbate global financial and health inequalities, but would hinder progress already made in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Comoros has awarded the Green Crescent Knight Medal to members of the Chinese short-term anti-COVID-19 medical team for their support to the country. The award, presented by Comorian President Azali Ousmane during the farewell ceremony, is considered the highest medal of honor in the country. The team of 12 medical experts arrived in the country in March as part of China's medical assistance to Comoros. The Chinese medical team shared China's anti-pandemic experience, conducted technical exchanges, and advanced vaccination efforts. Russian President Vladimir Putin has described talks with U.S. President Joe Biden as constructive. He said this following a summit with his counterpart in Geneva. The two leaders have agreed to return ambassadors to their respective posts in Washington and Moscow. Speaking to the media after their meeting, Putin said that he had reached an agreement with Biden to begin discussions surrounding cybersecurity. Biden is also expected to hold a news conference.
As for return of ambassadors to the locations where they work, to Moscow for the American ambassador and to Washington for the Russian one, we have agreed that this issue is resolved. They return to their postings. We aim to find solutions. As for Ukraine, yes, we have touched on this topic. I cannot say that we went into detail, but as far as I understood President Biden, he agrees that the basis for the settlement in southeast Ukraine is laid in the Minsk agreements.
A Palestinian woman was shot dead in the West Bank today after attempting to ram Israeli soldiers with her car and attack them with a knife. Earlier, Israel and Palestine had conducted their first exchange of attacks since a ceasefire which ended 11 days of deadly fighting last month. Israeli aircraft struck Gaza today in response to incendiary balloons launched from the Palestinian enclave. Hamas's initial attacks from Gaza on Tuesday occurred a few hours before a march by far-right Jewish nationalists took place in East Jerusalem. The rally celebrated Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967. You're watching Africa Live. The news continues. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's a look at what's ahead. On International Day of the African Child, how safe are schools for African children? We'll tell you more.
When I look at Kibera through my lens, I see the happiness, joy, kindness, and the togetherness of the people of Kibera.
I also love the power of social media because it has really played a very, very big role. We did videos, and those videos were sent through social media.
Nikikanyaga tu kwa koti, huwa nafeel kuna kitu natafuta na ng'ang'ana, yaani hata niwe mzuri kushinda na dada.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Richard Nta. Peace and stability in the West African sub-region has faced disruptions with terrorist attacks in Nigeria, military coups in Mali, and piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. Leaders of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, are meeting in Ghana's capital, Accra, for the 59th Ordinary Summit to discuss the threat of insecurity in the region. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rofai reports.
15 heads of state in West Africa are expected to arrive in Accra for the 59th ECOWAS Summit. Mali will not be participating in the summit as the country is still suspended by the regional bloc following the second military takeover. The 5-day summit has kicked off with the 46th Ordinary Meeting of the Mediation and Security Council. The ministers discussed issues that are threatening the political stability in countries within the region.
From the Sahel region through the Lake Chad Basin, attacks from terrorists and violent extremists have morphed with banditry, kidnapping, farmer-herder dynamics, and transnational organized crime to leave a trail of death, destruction, despair, and fear among our populations. This is particularly the case in the frontline states of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria, where these deadly attacks have occurred.
While the leaders are concerned about the political instability and insecurity in the region, they are also worried about maritime crimes.
The Gulf of Guinea itself has recorded the highest incidence of piracy and related maritime criminality in the world. The evolving developments in Chad, which straddles the Lake Chad Basin and the G5 Sahel countries, and the recent developments in Mali could add an aggravating element to the security situation facing the region.
The Mediation and Security Council ministers are expected to examine proposals to establish the Forum of National Security Advisors, which will reinforce the security of the West African states. On Wednesday and Thursday, the ECOWAS Council of Ministers will hold their meetings to discuss issues bordering trade and the impact of COVID-19 on the economy of the West African countries, as well as find solutions. The 59th ECOWAS Summit will climax on Saturday, with key decisions taken by the leaders to tackle the insecurity, political instability, and the economic challenges in West Africa. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
The Communist Party of China is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. Raphael Tuju, the General Secretary of the Jubilee Party, the ruling party in Kenya, has sent in his congratulatory messages.
I'd like to congratulate the CPC on marking the 100th anniversary since its founding. And at the same time, congratulate the CPC for the China miracle, because the China miracle would not have been possible without the leadership of CPC. And it is within my lifetime that I've seen this miracle, because in 1978, the GDP per capita of China was half that of the GDP per capita of Kenya. Now, some 40 years later, just one generation within my own lifetime, China is now the second biggest economy in the whole world. The GDP has grown exponentially, and this is a great credit to the CPC, and also a great credit to the resilience, the determination, the discipline of the Chinese people.
To the developing story on the historic meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. Biden is currently giving a presser following that meeting in Geneva. Let's listen in.
And we yield them to a government. And so the forum, I pointed out to him that's why we're going to raise our concerns about cases like Alexei Navalny. I made it clear to President Putin that we'll continue to raise issues of fundamental human rights, because that's what we are. That's who we are. The idea is we hold these truths self-evident, that all men and women, we haven't lived up to it completely, but we've always widened the arc of commitment and included more and more people. And I raised the case of two wrongfully imprisoned American citizens, Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed. I also raised the ability of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty to operate, and the importance of a free press and freedom of speech. I made it clear that we will not tolerate attempts to violate our democratic sovereignty or destabilize our democratic elections, and we would respond. The bottom line is, I told President Putin that we need to have some basic rules of the road that we can all abide by. I also said there are areas where there's a mutual interest for us to cooperate. For our people, Russian and American people, but also for the benefit of the world and the security of the world. One of those areas is strategic stability. You asked me many times, what was I going to discuss with Putin before I came? I told you I only negotiate with the individual, and now I can tell you what I was intending to do all along. And that is to discuss and raise the issue of strategic stability and try to set up a mechanism whereby we dealt with it. We discussed in detail the next steps our countries should take on arms control measures, the steps we need to take to reduce the risk of unintended conflict. And I'm pleased that we agreed today to launch a bilateral strategic stability dialogue. Diplomatic speak for saying, get our military experts and our diplomats together to work on a mechanism that can lead to control of new and dangerous and sophisticated weapons that are coming on the scene now, that reduce the times of response, that raise the prospects of accidental war. And we went into some detail of what those weapon systems were. Another area we spent a great deal of time on was cyber and cybersecurity. I talked about the proposition that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber or any other means. I gave them a list. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, 16 specific entities, 16 defined as critical infrastructure under U.S. policy. From the energy sector.
Well, that was President Joe Biden of the United States giving a presser in Geneva following the meeting with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. And in other news, today marks the International Day of the African Child. The day is meant to highlight issues surrounding children on the African continent. It was created in 1991 by the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. This was after hundreds of children were shot down in 1976 following a protest against discrimination in South Africa. Students in Soweto had taken to the streets to demonstrate against the Black Education Act, which segregated students based on their race. And in the 2 weeks of protests that followed, more than 100 students were killed and thousands others injured. Nigeria's ongoing war against an Islamist insurgency has left millions of displaced children from the northeast of the country without access to basic education. Those caught up in the conflict, which has raged on for 11 years now, face an uncertain future. But one woman is doing all she can to give some of these internally displaced children a chance to make it in life. Correspondent Philly Haza met her at one of the IDP camps in Abuja.
15-year-old Mohammed Usman lost his father during a Boko Haram attack in Borno State 8 years ago. Mohammed says he had to flee with his aunt to this internally displaced camp in Abuja.
My dad was killed in Maiduguri by Boko Haram. Even my mum is missing. But going to school now is gradually helping me to get over the trauma.
There are several other children in this camp like Mohammed who are now attending school, thanks to Zainab Aliyu, who is fondly called Mama IDP here. She has taken it upon herself to sponsor many of them, including Mohammed, through school. She pays for their tuition, provides educational materials like school bags and exercise books. Zainab says for her, educating IDP children is one way to tackle insurgency because without proper education, they are vulnerable recruits to terrorist groups.
90% are not educated. They need that basic education. They need the knowledge so that no one will initiate them into bad groups.
The United Nations says nearly 3 million people, including children, are displaced from the decade-long war on insurgency in Nigeria. And many of them are part of the over 10 million out-of-school children in the country.
As a result of efforts from the likes of Mama IDP, many internally displaced children here say they can now dream of a better future.
However, Zainab says the task ahead is enormous and there is a need for more well-meaning citizens to join this initiative.
For me to educate over 100 children, it's a way forward. It's a stepping stone for others. If I can do 100, you will do 100. Let's say 100 million adults will help those children. Everybody will be educated. They will be educated and they will be comfortable in school.
For now, the simple dream for Mama IDP is to see the likes of Mohammed graduate from school and find a job. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Betty Abba, who runs the Center for Children's Health Education, Orientation and Protection, engaged with us on the significance of the Day of the African Child. She was speaking from Lagos in Nigeria. Let's take a listen.
The celebration of the Day of the African Child in the first place is a very commendable effort to put the searchlight on the state of the African child, the very vulnerable state of the African child. But sadly enough, it has turned to more of an annual ritual of lamentation, because not much effort has been put into the improvement of the lives of the African child by most states across Africa. And I can speak comfortably for Nigeria. And talking about the impact of the pandemic in the country, I think that the situation of the African child, of the Nigerian child, is even worsening, because millions and millions of households are struggling to stay alive, to survive, without much safety nets, without access to welfare programs by the government, with virtually no welfare program by the government. And so I think the education, the safety, the health of the African child, of the Nigerian child, is at its most vulnerable peak from my point of view. And working with children in informal communities, in refugee, in IDP camps, in impoverished communities, we are beginning to see worsening conditions, and children are at the receiving end.
And it's time now for our business segment with Uche.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Ghana's economic growth slows in the first quarter as the country regains momentum. And France and Egypt sign around $4.6 billion worth of bilateral agreements.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Well, let's start off in Ghana. The country's economic growth slowed in the first quarter as a recovery from last year's slump struggles to gain momentum. Now, the government says the gross domestic product expanded 3.1% from a year earlier, and that's compared with a 3.3% growth in the 3 months through December. Now, the economy grew 0.8% from the previous quarter. Of course, Ghana is slowly recovering from COVID-induced restrictions and a drop in oil prices that caused its first recession since at least 2007. The International Monetary Fund projects GDP growth of 4.6% this year and 6.1% in 2022. An unexpected interest rate cut by the central bank last month could certainly help further boost a recovery and help offset the impact of new taxes and plans to narrow the budget deficit on spending. Meanwhile, France and Egypt have agreed to strengthen their economic ties, which have been growing in recent years. During his visit to Cairo, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire signed agreements worth around $4.6 billion with the government. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
France and Egypt inked projects worth nearly €4 billion during the visit by French Economy and Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire. Half the amount is earmarked for the development and management of underground metro lines in Cairo. The rest are targeting infrastructure projects in railway, energy, water treatment and food security over the next 4 years. The French official says France targets to jump from 8th to a top 3 foreign direct investor in the North African country.
There are new regulations in Egypt to ease exports and facilitate procedures for setting up a business and acquiring licenses to establish new projects. All these procedures provide good opportunities for investors here. Egypt is a promising market with over 100 million population and is a top attraction for foreign direct investments in Africa. All this encourages the French businessmen to raise their investments in Egypt.
Both sides emphasize the need to indulge more in environmentally friendly projects within the allocated funds.
There are projects underway in clean energy, such as solar energy, with the largest solar power station in the world in Aswan, Upper Egypt. There are wastewater treatment projects in partnership with France, and the same in agriculture. More projects are expected in the green economy between Egypt and France in the near future.
Several MOUs have also been designated for projects in healthcare services and renewables as per Sustainable Development Goals. Talks in Cairo also focused on an ambitious plan for Egypt to become a major export hub for French products and services in the Middle East and Africa. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, South Africa's largest trade union federation, COSATU, is calling on the Reserve Bank to assist poor South Africans. The union wants the central bank to cut rates further so that commercial banks in the country can ease up on customers with heavy debt and those that need to borrow money. CGTN Richard Nta with more.
Since COVID hit in 2020, the South African Reserve Bank cut rates by 300 basis points. The repo rate for commercial banks is currently at its lowest point in history at 3.5%, while the interest rate for citizens is at 7%. COSATU believes there is room for further relief.
Firstly, it is going to help the economy. But secondly, many of these people are highly indebted. They are defaulting on their debts. And we are hoping that this will give them some kind of relief, especially workers who are losing cars, who are losing houses. They need some kind of relief from government.
Inflation has lifted from its lows but remains moderate. It's clear the Reserve Bank is done with rate cuts for now. In fact, according to the bank's projection model, 2 rate hikes are likely this year.
It's unlikely that we will see, for instance, a further cut in interest rates. Our current interest rates are at a 50-year low. It's been as low only in 1973. So already interest rates have been cut aggressively. And in the meantime, as we see economies, recovering from the COVID pandemic, we have also started to see prices increasing. So some inflation creeping into the system.
GDP data out last week showed the economy grew by 1.1% in the first 3 months of this year and has grown for the third quarter in a row. But it is still 2.7% smaller than it was in the fourth quarter of 2020. Unemployment is at a new record high of 32.6%.
South Africa has been in this quagmire for over a decade. COVID just made matters worse. Some argue that COSATU is banging on the wrong door.
Almost 50% of South Africans of working age are really unemployed. And we are close to 21 million people who are dependent on social grants. We just need some kind of relief, because if you look at the GDP numbers, they are positive in a sense, but they are also hiding a bigger story. The fact that the majority of South Africans are really sinking.
So, I mean, I totally understand, that COSATU would like to be part of, the drive to get the economy better, but it's perhaps just a matter of tweaking the focus a bit, away from monetary policy per se, but rather to do more the actual operational part of the economy. What can government do to make the environment more favorable for economic growth to happen?
The next meeting on rates will be in July. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now. The country has been hailed as one of the leading digital innovators on the continent, and that's due to the growth in its mobile money payment platforms. Now, those now account for the majority of transactions in the country. Here's CGTN's Farai Makutuya with the details from Harare.
A market where hard cash was formerly king has been rapidly transformed into a predominantly cashless marketplace. According to the World Bank, there are over 7.5 million mobile wallets registered here, out of an estimated 14 million population.
we are a country that has got at least 91, 92% literacy rates, which means we are ready to embrace technology whenever it comes our way. On another note, remember, we are a country that is driven by digital money. When I say digital money, we like our EcoCash, we like our mobile money, and we don't have physical money. That means 96% of our transactions are what? Are electronic.
The growth has been driven not just by the long-running shortage of bank notes, but also the convenience that mobile transactions offer and a government push to widen financial inclusion. Due to the highly informalized nature of the economy, as much as 70% of the population is unbanked. That's according to 2020 statistics from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. However, the high prevalence of mobile wallets here means many of those who are unbanked can still be part of the financial ecosystem. Going forward, experts see other forms of digital currency thriving.
Zimbabwe is actually way ahead when you look at accepting this digital currency, mobile money, credit cards, and all those things. Yeah, we are on the right path. Everybody now is embracing digital currency. Look at it, even the Reserve Bank is talking about bitcoins being an official currency. In short, it is good because we now have a currency that we can trade in.
Government says it intends to build on the strides made in digital transformation by opening up more community information centers and commissioning mobile base stations in the remotest parts of the country to deepen mobile and internet penetration. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And now to some international news. There has been a breakthrough at the EU-US summit on a long-running airline subsidy dispute. Now, of course, US President Joe Biden met with European leaders in Brussels, calming trade relations after the fury of the Trump years. Here's Lucy Hoff with more from Brussels.
Negotiating teams for the US and the EU have been looking to achieve a permanent resolution for this long-running trade dispute that has now lasted nearly 2 decades. In frenetic overnight talks on Monday, a peace deal was achieved that will see the suspension of retaliatory tariffs for the next 5 years. EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said it marked a significant turning point in transatlantic relations.
The agreement we have found now really opens a new chapter in our relationship because we move from litigation to cooperation on aircraft, and that after almost 20 years of disputes. It is the longest trade dispute in the history of WTO.
The EU has given Washington until December to remove Trump-era duties and has said it will be suspending tariffs on aluminium and metal for the next 6 months. The US said resolving trade tensions with the EU would allow both sides to focus on China, namely its production levels of metal. Richard Nta is the US trade representative.
For almost 20 years, we have been at each other's throats. Fighting each other in terms of the terms of competition between our industries. While we have been engaged in this fight, others are taking the opportunity to launch their own industries, and we have been too busy fighting each other to pay attention.
However, the US may find it more difficult to remove the metals tariffs, which apply to other countries as well as China, because they are backed by US metal producers and workers. In a meeting that was designed to find areas of renewed transatlantic cooperation, there was the establishment of a joint trade and technology council, which is designed at competing with China. Lucy Hoff, CGTN, Brussels.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, more on South Africa's economy after President Ramaphosa's speech today. The country is set to get a 2 million COVID-19 vaccine boost from Johnson & Johnson. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Plenty more to come on Africa Live. Don't go away. Here's a peek at the headline. Germany prepares to return looted artifacts to Nigeria. So what do the locals think about this initiative?
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys The greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Nta, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Artifacts that were looted during the colonial era will finally be making their way back to Africa. Recently, Nigeria and Germany committed to substantive returns of the Benin bronzes that were taken by the British Army in the late 1800s. The first returns are planned for 2022. CGTN's Deji Badamus reports on how the initiative is being received in Nigeria.
If there's one place where you would expect an open excitement over the plan to return Nigeria's looted artifacts, it's among the country's arts community. But the reception to the idea has been mixed and tempered.
And looking at those artworks, they depict intelligence, they depict intellectualism, they depict dignity, they depict hard work, they depict wealth, they depict so many things. And to have them back is a plus.
But I still think they needed to educate some people who can look after it. They should send some younger people for training, how they can keep it in a certain temperature, so they will be able to maintain it. There is no capacity yet, I will tell you. I'm into art, and I know what we have and what we can maintain. The art of maintenance in Nigeria is still a bit low.
Indeed, maintaining the artifacts when they're eventually returned has been a key issue for art patrons like Yemisi Shilon, one of the biggest individual art collectors in Nigeria.
So my problem is, to what extent have we prepared the environment and the ambience for receiving those works? To what extent have we trained people to take care of, to conserve those works? To what extent do we have people who are very interested in these works and are publishing papers and would rather want those works to be around us so that it will be easier for research? My problem is we tend to want these works back because of the value that the looters have placed on these works, the investment they have made over the years. But I keep asking you, what investment have you made with the ones with you that were not looted?
British troops invaded the ancient Benin Kingdom in present-day Edo State, southern Nigeria in 1897, looting thousands of artworks known as the Benin bronzes. Some of the bronzes were later auctioned to museums and private collectors across Europe. The artifacts hold deep cultural significance, and there's been growing international pressure to return them. Institutions in Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, and a host of countries have now committed to returning the stolen artifacts.
If you take away the artwork of a people from them, it's like you have taken their historical record away from them, because there's a way we connect to our history through those artworks. And if that is taken away, you know what that means. You may lose memory of all your past glories.
The British Museum has committed to assist in building a museum in the southern city of Benin, where the returned artifacts are expected to be kept. But not many are convinced that will be enough to guarantee their safety and maintenance. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All right, we've got your sports news coming up after the break, so don't go away. Let's take a look at the headline. In sports, Austria's Marko Arnautovic handed one-game ban for insulting North Macedonia's player.